listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
Happy Thursday, everyone. Thank you for letting me spend some time with you today. I am not exactly being monitored and supervised. Myra is visiting family to take care of, I shouldn't say it that way, to stay with our youngest granddaughter while her mother, who works in the hotel industry, is taking some well-deserved time off and a little bit of time for herself. So Susie's here attempting to supervise, although she's currently busy watching a small herd of deer through the window. So if you hear her bark, she's just letting me know they're there. All kinds of good things going on today. If I sound a little frazzled tonight and a little off kilter, I spent a couple hours today doing some interviews, and I realize now why writing books is called work. When you write more than one, you have to kind of keep track of what's in each one as you're talking to people. It can be taxing on the brain because you don't want to confuse them, right? You want to keep you concentrate on what's in each one, and sometimes that's kind of difficult to do. But as soon as those are released, I will link to them on GiveGod90.com. If you're looking for the books, that's at authorjerrymitchell.com, and I appreciate that. Also, I haven't said anything the last couple times, but Books Life Marketing, who has been helping me kind of get the ball rolling with these again, has put up a Facebook page for me. If you search for Jerry Mitchell on Facebook, you'll find that that page, and you can like it, follow it, whatever you do with Facebook. I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook. I spend very little time on social media anyway, but even less time on Facebook. It's just one of those things I don't really get into. I don't see the need for it. If you like what you hear, I really appreciate that, and would appreciate those like buttons and share buttons and all those good things. It just makes it easier for people to find us, just like it was easier for you to find us because somebody else did it first. But that would go a long way to help us in the analytics and make it easier for folks to get to hear what we have to say. Tonight I want to, I get to talk about something a little more fun than the last time. And that is the joy and the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot. We find that, of course, in Leviticus 23 and Deuteronomy 16 and all those good places. But from Leviticus 23, Jehovah said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say, on the 15th day of the 7th month," that's the 7th biblical month, the feast is the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, the Feast of Tabernacles, of course, is Sukkot, the autumn feast of pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It's also translated as Feast of Booths, Feast of Shelters. It was originally called the Feast of Ingathering for some reason. Later, it was called the Great Feast. So that's just to let you know. It continues for 7 days. And in verse 35, it goes on the first day shall be a sacred assembly. You must not do any regular work. For 7 days, you are to present an offering made by fire to Jehovah. On the 8th day, you are to hold a sacred assembly and present an offering made by fire to Jehovah in a solemn assembly. You must not do any regular work. Of course, that's from Leviticus 23, beginning in 36 through, beginning in 34 through 36. Now, some have heard me say that Sukkot is a 7-day feast that lasts for 8 days. We just read that. And, of course, the last day is known as the last great day. More on that later. Sukkot is the feast that Hanukkah is patterned after. If you read the Maccabees and the accounts of Josephus, you'll see that the Maccabees, after they rededicated the temple, they were so happy, they wanted to celebrate, and so they created a celebration patterned after the great feast, Sukkot, and that's why you have 8 days of Hanukkah. Now, when I began this series, I started with Hebrews 10, and in verse 1, the law is only a shadow of good things to come, not the realities themselves. These shadows, or these unclear pictures, are things that our Creator uses to show us how He is working in His creation. For instance, when we look at Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we see the crucifixion of Yeshua, Jesus, and it fits the things that happen throughout the week. Makes a lot of sense, right? If the Almighty is going to set these appointed times, then these appointed times must be times when He says, okay, I'm going to do something important. So He does. Well, when we look at Sukkot, what should we see? What should we see if we look at the Fall Feast of Tabernacles, the Fall Feast of Booths? Well, to be honest, we're going to see things we don't see in December. We see an appointed time when the people were called to come to Jerusalem. We see a time when Jerusalem would be completely filled with people who were there to celebrate. We see a time when it was actually just the men who were to reside in those temporary shelters. The Sukkot is plural, Sukkah is singular. But the women didn't have to. They would usually stay either in Jerusalem or in the surrounding communities, the surrounding villages, with other women. It sounds a lot like Luke chapter 2, doesn't it? Think about that. Remember, in Luke chapter 2, it reads, "Now in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census should be taken of the whole empire. This was the first census to take place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to his town to register. So Joseph went up from Nazareth to Galilee to Judea, in the city of David called Bethlehem, since he was from the house and the lineage of David. David being from the tribe of Judah. So he went to Judah, to Bethlehem, the city of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to him in marriage and was expecting a child." Now let's put this into some historical perspective. Notice I said historical perspective, not hysterical perspective. Into some historical perspective. We have recently discovered Roman documents where Pontius Pilate is complaining that I don't have enough troops to really control this place you've put me in. He was complaining back to Rome that they didn't give him enough soldiers to actually occupy Judea. We think about the Second Temple period during the Roman occupation, and we say, oh, there was just soldiers everywhere, and they were just really downtrodden the people. Apparently, that's not how it was according to the official Roman documents. Pilate was saying, I don't have enough people. You got to do something here, Caesar. You got to send me some more soldiers. So, what that means is that they had to kind of tread lightly if they wanted to keep the peace, right? Now, the end of December is the winter solstice. It's the time when the Romans and also the Roman soldiers would be looking forward to celebrating their biggest season of the year. It was the rejuvenation of the sun. And the Romans were worshipers of the sun god Mithra. So, would it make any sense for Pilate to try and call everybody from Judea back to Jerusalem at a time of year when they wouldn't want to travel, when it was kind of dangerous to travel, and when the soldiers were wanting to celebrate their own holiday? Or would it make more sense to count the people, take the census at a time when he already knew that everybody would be coming to Jerusalem, they were going to be in a good mood, they were ready to celebrate, and they were willing to be counted? Now, if you happen to be a modern military person, okay, if you were seriously outnumbered in a foreign country and you wanted to count the people, what would you do? What would you do? See, these are things that we don't take into consideration when we are hearing the stories in Luke chapter 2. But when we learn the lessons and we look at the language, the culture, and the history, we get a different picture, don't we? Because when you put language, culture, and history together, it offers us context. So Joseph takes Mary. And remember, Mary had just been at Elizabeth's home a few weeks before that. And the description of that is that Elizabeth lived in the hill country of Judah. Well, where's the hill country of Judah? Well, Zechariah, Elizabeth's husband, was a priest. He served in the temple in the course of Abia. Well, if you were serving in the temple, you wanted to kind of live close to where you were going to work, right? So most likely they were living pretty close to Jerusalem. It made sense that his home would be somewhere around the Jerusalem or Bethlehem area. But even Elizabeth turned Mary away. There was no room because everybody was there. Everybody came to celebrate the great feast. A little more culture and history perspective. The fields between Jerusalem and Bethlehem were actually the pastures for the sheep that were used in the temple services. But with so many people coming to the feast, what became customary was the shepherds would move those sheep up along the hillsides out of those pastures so that the men could come in, and basically what they would do is they would construct these Sukkot villages, these booth villages, tabernacle villages in the pastures where the sheep for the temple services would normally winter. Isn't that amazing? So now it's not that far between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, by the way. It's really not that far. So what you have is these rows of tabernacles, shelters, booths, shacks, whatever you want to call them, temporary dwellings, strung across this pasture ground, and it forms what could best be described as a Sukkot village. So the stage is set. The stage is now set. Mary can't stay in town because there's no room. She goes with Joseph. He builds his sukkah, and she plans to be there with him. Well, on the first night, what happens? Mary says, Joseph, I think it's time. My water just broke. So on the first night of Sukkot, a child is born. A child is born in the pasture where the sheep for the temple services are typically going to be. It's also where they would lamb in the spring of the year. Word comes to the shepherds, you got to go look at this. Now, this is something that wasn't done during this time. Today, somebody brings a new baby home, everybody goes to see the new baby. But back then, you let mom and baby bond. So why were the shepherds told to go do this? Well, it was a shepherd's job to inspect the lamb. It was a shepherd's job to inspect the child. Now, I need to interject something here, because every nativity scene you see is going to include the wise men. Well, the wise men were about 500 miles away. They could look up, they could see the stars, they knew the conjunction that they were supposed to be looking for, they knew the signs, but unless the wise men were feeding those camels some hay and some really good steroids, there was no way that they were getting to Jerusalem that night. There's no way they were getting to Jerusalem for a long time. Just want to say that so that everybody knows the wise men did not show up that night. But anyway, the child was born on the first day of the great feast, and 8 days later, on the last great day, circumcised. Hopefully you can read the story of that in your Bibles. This fits more logically, more culturally accurately, more historically accurate than a child born in December in a stable. If you read Tradition to Truth, you get a much more clear picture of that. I explain it a little bit better in there. Now today, 2,000 years later, some people refer to Sukkot as the Feast of Hotels. And that's because in Jerusalem, the balconies of the hotels are outfitted with temporary shelters. They're in Jerusalem where they're supposed to be. Susie, hush. They're in Jerusalem where they should be. And they're doing the things that they need to do. They're going through the motions, but it's crowded. There's not a lot of room left in Jerusalem. There's not a lot, and it's not safe between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, which is the West Bank. So that's why they consider it Feast of Hotels, because people will go to a hotel, they will stay on the balconies. I imagine this year is going to be a little different, right? There is a tremendous threat of violence, and I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing at the pup who just discovered that the chair turns. There's a threat of violence. There's conflict in and around Israel. There's a lot of people who want to be there that just are not going to be there for various reasons. And sadly, there is a verse in Zechariah about that. And in Zechariah 14, should any families of the earth not go to Jerusalem to worship the King, Jehovah of hosts, the rain will not fall on them. That's sad. That's sad. Now, I'm going to include something here. Our Creator absolutely knows, He absolutely understands that not everyone who has a desire, and I mean a burning desire, to go to Jerusalem is physically able to make it. He understands that. And our Creator knows that there are things that will prevent it, especially this year. Travel's being restricted. There's a threat of violence. All of those things. Some people just can't afford it. It's expensive to go to Israel. But that doesn't stop us from being able to observe this feast and meeting with our Creator the best way possible. I've said before that Daniel, when he was in captivity in Babylon, he had a desire to go, but he couldn't. He wasn't allowed to go. He would have been killed if he even tried. But his desire, that burning desire that he had to want to go, that, along with being as obedient as he possibly could, is why he was rewarded with a visit from Gabriel. And Gabriel brings a message straight from the throne room. Daniel wanted to go, but he wasn't physically able to go. Not because of his health, not because of his finances. He was in captivity. Some of us may consider ourselves in captivity for various reasons, whether they're financial, physical, health, or war. If your heart is to please your Creator, consider observing Sukkot this year the best way you are able. Sukkot is a celebration that not only remembers the time spent in the wilderness, in the land of Midian, it remembers the birth of the prophet Yeshua, and it looks forward to the time of a reigning Messiah. It's a celebration of all these things that you can be a part of if you choose to be. Did you know that it was during the Feast of Sukkot when Yeshua said, "My teaching is not my own. It comes from him who sent me." Jesus didn't bring anything new. He brought a reminder that God never changes. Just like it says in Malachi 3:6. I, Jehovah, do not change, so that you, the sons of Jacob, are not destroyed. His teaching was not his own. It was the Almighty's teaching that he was reminding us is the most important. It was also on the last great day when he stood up and interrupted their service, where they would pour water out on the Temple Mount. Remember, water is used in worship to, it's a physical display. And he stands up in the midst of this and he says, "Hey, if anybody's thirsty, come to me." He interrupts the service. And I've explained that in great detail in other podcasts. Knowing the language, knowing the culture, knowing the history gives context to the Bible. And it changes what we see from just a series of still photographs into a video. And I'm going to say this as well. Understanding that the Hebrew language is action-based, verb-based. When you learn to see things that way, and you see the action, not just a description, you become part of that video. It's almost like you're there. So do yourself a favor. Observe the Feast of Sukkot. Don't get caught up in all the trappings and all the traditions, because there's a lot of things associated with it now. But celebrate it instead from your heart, just like Daniel would have. He couldn't build a sukkah. He couldn't go camping. He couldn't do all those things. But his burning desire to be obedient. Remember, obedience is better than sacrifice. And true obedience is worship. Daniel understood it. David understood it. And we need to understand that also. True obedience is worship. Celebrate Sukkot and see what you get out of it. Read what you can, do what you are able, and be blessed. And until Monday, I do wish you many, many blessings, everyone.